Welcome to The Explainer. So, when you hear the word neutrality, what pops into your head? Sitting on the sidelines? Apathy? Weakness? Well, today we're going to challenge those assumptions head on. We're unpacking what it truly means for a country to be neutral in a really complex world of escalating conflict and polarization.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at the fence-sitter myth, redefine what engaged neutrality actually means, dive into an Austrian case study, see what happens when neutrality meets the EU, and finally, look at the future of neutrals. Let's jump right in.
All right, Section 1. The fence-sitter myth, unpacking the misconception of passivity.
You know, it's incredibly common to just assume that neutral countries kind of hide when a conflict breaks out. But the legal reality, it's way more demanding. We really have to ask ourselves, what does it actually mean to be neutral? Because, spoiler alert, it's a lot more than just a political preference. It's a deeply entrenched legal doctrine.
Legally speaking, neutrality means you're absolutely not participating in a war or armed conflict. And, crucially, no membership in a military alliance. It also explicitly bans foreign troops from setting up shop on your territory. So, to put that in plain English, a neutral state legally cannot join groups with mutual defense pacts, like NATO, and they definitely can't host foreign military bases. No way.
Moving on to Section 2, redefining engaged neutrality, from traditional isolation to modern engagement.
Okay, so the reality here is that neutrality hasn't just been stuck in the 19th century. It's evolved. Traditional neutrality used to be all about just avoiding hot shooting wars. But then the Cold War happened, and things shifted. Modern neutrality is much more focused on avoiding military alliances. It's less about sticking your head in the sand and ignoring conflicts, and much more about preserving your independence by not getting legally chained to a massive military bloc. Now, consider this absolutely wild piece of history. Back in 1907, King Edward VII actually advised Austria-Hungary to adopt neutrality. Why does that matter? Well, historians argue that if Austria had actually taken his advice, World War I most likely would never have happened. It's like a giant puzzle piece. Without Austria backing them, it's highly improbable Germany would have gone to war against Russia. It just perfectly illustrates the literal world-altering impact a neutral stance can have. But look, a country can't just shout, "I'm neutral," and magically expect everyone to leave them alone. To actually get respect from major powers, neutral states have to nail down two crucial things. First up is credibility. That means your neutrality is predictable and, surprisingly, armed. You have to be able to defend it. Second is utility. You have to actually be useful to the international community. That could mean acting as a physical buffer state or providing good offices, like hosting diplomatic negotiations or mediating disputes. And all of this comes with some super dense, strict legal duties rooted way back in the 1907 Hague Conventions. We're talking about abstention, meaning you absolutely cannot play favorites with belligerents, no loans, no military support. Then there's prevention. You have to actively stop military recruiting or fighting from happening on your own soil. And finally, acquiescence. This basically means you have to accept certain legal actions by warring parties, like prize court decisions, just as long as they comply with the laws of war. There's this incredibly powerful concept from the source text that really hits the nail on the head. It says, engaged neutrality means active participation in international security policy, interfering where possible and staying out only where necessary. So the huge takeaway here is that modern neutrality is not value neutral. It actively requires taking a principled stand. A neutral state still has to condemn serious human rights violations and genocide. They just do it without adopting the military posturing of the great powers. Which brings us to Section 3, the Austrian case study, balancing a constitutional soul with modern alliances. Let's take all these abstract legal concepts and give them a tangible face, shall we? If we trace Austria's journey, it's super fascinating. Back in 1955, the state treaty and constitutional law established their permanent neutrality, which finally got Allied troops to pack up and leave after World War II. Fast forward to 1995, and Austria joins the EU. By 2009, the Lisbon Treaty brings in new collective defense commitments. And then, boom, 2022, the invasion of Ukraine puts Austria's neutrality to its ultimate modern test. Jumping back to that 1955 origin story for a second, U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower actually only accepted Austria's declaration of neutrality on one strict condition. They had to be able to defend it. They literally had to be armed with all means at their disposal. It perfectly reinforces what we were just talking about, right?
True credibility in the eyes of global superpowers means having a military capable of protecting your own borders.
But here's a brain teaser. How did Austria legally join the United Nations in 1955? I mean, the UN is literally built on collective security. Well, they used something called the Vardrus Doctrine. Formulated by legal scholars, this gave Austria a special passive status. It basically allowed them to participate in UN collective sanctions without violating their core neutrality. It was a real game changer that set up the framework for what was called active neutrality.
All right, let's move to Section 4. Neutrality meets the EU, the collision of European solidarity and constitutional law. So what actually happens when a permanently neutral country joins a highly integrated, tightly knit group like the European Union? Well, you get a direct collision. The EU's Lisbon Treaty, specifically Article 42, Paragraph 7, obligates member states to assist if another member gets attacked. But this directly clashes with the strict rules of the Austrian constitution, which completely forbids joining military alliances or fighting in foreign wars. It's a massive legal headache.
To solve this giant puzzle, they rely on a clever legal workaround called constructive abstention. This functional adaptation is exactly how Austria manages modern crises impartially today. It legally lets Austria dodge those automatic military defense obligations, while still politically standing with the EU. For instance, during the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, this very mechanism allowed Austria to fund non-lethal and humanitarian aid without breaking a single one of its own laws. Pretty brilliant, right? Now, you might hear some alliances refer to neutral states as free riders who just let everyone else handle the heavy lifting of defense. But get this, proportionally, Austria deploys more peacekeeping troops than most NATO countries. Let that sink in. That completely shatters the free rider myth right there. This is exactly what we mean when we talk about engaged neutrality in the real world.
And to back that up even further, just look at Austria's tangible everyday contributions. They are super active in UN and EU peace missions. They dish out extensive logistical and humanitarian aid. They're part of NATO's Partnership for Peace, and they even jump into PESCO projects for EU security. The bottom line? A neutral state can be remarkably active and incredibly helpful in international security, just as long as they stay out of those mutual defense pacts.
Finally, Section 5, the future of neutrals, navigating a polarized world. As our global security environment keeps fracturing, we really have to look objectively at what comes next. I mean, we've recently witnessed some tectonic shifts. By ditching their historic neutrality to join NATO, Finland and Sweden made a massive strategic pivot. Almost overnight, they transitioned from being recognized buffer states into frontline states. And that's the trade-off. When a country opts for an alliance, it gives up its unique diplomatic utility as a middleman and totally rewrites its strategic posture. So the big takeaway from all this? Successful neutrality is omnipartial, not impartial. It's a living, dynamic, legally conditioned strategy. It requires constant, active engagement with every single party involved in a conflict. It's about being out there, mediating, offering up your territory for diplomacy, and fiercely standing up for human rights. It is absolutely not about just sitting on the sidelines watching the world burn. So, I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. In an increasingly polarized world, is neutrality just a relic of the past, or is it actually the secret key to future peace? The evidence we've looked at suggests that as long as conflicts keep flaring up, engaged, credible, and useful neutral states are going to be absolutely vital for global stability. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and as always, keep learning.